Welcome to Godot. We're going to learn how to do UI layouts today. This has a bad reputation, but I don't understand why. It's substantially easier and better than in Unreal or Unity, so let's go ahead and learn it. I think that the reason people don't understand Godot's UI and start to get upset at it is because they don't understand how sharp the tools are. There are very specific ways to do exactly what you need, and if you do it any other way, you're going to be working against those tools, and I think that's what a lot of people end up doing. So if you're struggling to get your UI to work in Godot, you're probably just using the wrong tool. So let's go over the 3 big points that you're going to need, and we'll go ahead and create some UI in the process. The first thing you have to understand is that a 2D node is not the same as a UI node. These blue icons are not the same as these green icons. 2D nodes ignore all of the UI related stuff and break the UI layout flow. So if you're running into some problems, the first thing you want to do is just take a glance at your UI list, the things that are in your UI, and make sure all the icons are green. If you've got some blue mixed in, you just picked the wrong kind of node. And that's easy to do because a lot of the same stuff is needed for both. Yeah, you need a textured display node to display your spaceship that flies around in space, but you also need a textured display node to display, an icon in your menu. So both of these trees, both of these branches of the 2D development have the same basic functionality, but you need the user interface one if you're doing a user interface. Otherwise, it all breaks. When we click on a new node, we get the default control node. There's nothing special about this. It's literally just the base control right here. You don't actually need it. You can create this stuff anywhere you want. You can create your UI directly on top of your game. You can look at your game window and create your UI on top of it. You can save it as a separate scene later or maybe never, depending on what you need. Having this control node set up as a base is not mandatory. You do not need it. You do not need to set up a canvas as a separate object. You don't need any of that stuff. You can literally just plonk UI nodes anywhere you friggin' want and it'll work fine. But let's talk about the second rule that you have to learn, the most important rule. This one is the thing that gets people most confused. The difference between a container and literally every other kind of UI control. So here's a panel. It looks like this, and we can change the layout. So we could make it so it's got anchors and it anchors to the left here. And that way, if someone has a different size screen or whatever, it will resize to their resolution just fine, right? And we could also create a panel container, which looks like this and has all of the exact same seeming functionality. We can set it up to anchor to the right instead. Whatever we want, right? Oh, I clicked on the wrong thing there. And it's hard to tell these apart because they look literally exactly the same. Right? But they have completely different uses. Like they are entirely unrelated in terms of laying things out. Containers, all containers of every sort, you can see it's an entire branch called containers. All of these control how the children are laid out. Whereas every other kind of control doesn't give a shit. If it's not a container, it does not care what's inside it, and it will not attempt to control it in any way, layout-wise. So it's really important to understand whether you need a container or not. Let me give a demonstration. We're going to go ahead and add a button here. Here's a button inside of our default panel. We can do it like this. We can lay it out however we want. Very easy, right? And of course, we can do all of that same layout stuff, anchor it, and however we want. We could anchor it to the left or whatever. It doesn't really matter. We're just doing it as a demonstration. On the other hand, if we add a button here, it fills the entire panel container because that's what the panel container does. We can't change how this button is laid out. If we tried to go into the layout, it says no. And if we were to try and force it using these tools up here, we can't. None of these tools work because it is being controlled by the panel container. Now, there are times when you want to be able to manually move these things around like this, and there are times when you want it to be controlled. Understanding where you are in that is the basis of all UI in Godot. Do you need a container or not? Why would you want a container? Well, containers are really handy if you want to be able to add stuff really easily and fast. For example, we can add a VBox. And then if we add buttons here, we can just get ourselves a bunch of buttons. And look, there's a menu, right? Whereas if we were trying to do that freehand, we would have to like manually try and lock the buttons in place, and just, every time we wanted to add a button, we'd have to consider exactly where it's going. And moreover, this will automatically adjust to a lot of different sizes and scales and getting put inside of other objects, whereas this won't. Not as easily anyway. So this is very handy if we're trying to create something like a menu, but this is the ugliest menu on the planet. And here is where a lot of people go awry. They're like, okay, well, I want this menu to suck less, so I guess I have to add like a panel inside of the panel container so that I can adjust the margins. And no, here's the third thing that you have to learn. Themes. Themes are the #1 way to tell these containers how to lay out their children. These containers lay out their children by force. Here's where you tell them how to do that. You don't want to work against a container by trying to forcefully lay out the children using non-containers. Just use the containers how they're supposed to be used, and for that you use themes. So in this case, we can override the panel container. The panel container, not the panel. This is a panel. This is a panel container. So we want to override the panel container, and then we can set it up to have a different style box. And when we have that, we can edit it to look however we want. We can give it like, something like this. And then we can come down and we can make it have a border, maybe 5 and 5. And we can make that corner radius to be like 50, 50, 50, 50. And we can change the margins, the content margins, to something like 30, 50, 30, 50. And there we go. We now have a menu, right? And we can also override the VBox container. However, the VBox container does not have the same options. This is important to understand. Not all containers have all options. The only option the VBox container has is separation. So we can obviously override that and make it separate however we want, right? That's easy enough. So there are times when you will need to nest containers, but you will almost never want to nest a non-container inside of a container, inside of a non-container, inside of a container. That's almost never necessary. Normally what you would like to do is you'd like to keep it containers all the way down until the very final form, the buttons themselves, that sort of stuff. You want to try and keep it containers all the way down and use theming to try and get that to work. And of course, we can override the buttons as well. You might have noticed that all of these things inherit. So you always inherit from your theme from your parents. And so we can bring it in here. We can just grab a normal, change it out for a new style blocks flat here. There. And obviously we can override that. Keep in mind that you can, in fact, copy and paste entire style blocks. There's no need to worry. These look like they're going to be annoying because there's like 18 different things you want to override. It's not that bad because you can cut and paste, like just copy, make unique, and copy and paste is pretty easy. And then you can come down here. We can just add in that content margin again, make it so that it's maybe 10 and 10. And it's a little too tall for our screen, so maybe we want to shrink them down or whatever. It doesn't really matter, right? We can do whatever we want at this point because we're just showing you how it's done. This is super basic, super easy. This is how you would create a menu. You can obviously make it look however you want. You can even do something cool like skew it. It's then just a matter of hooking up these buttons. So I don't want anyone to think that UI in Godot is hard. Now let's hammer that home. Let's go ahead and create a visual novel text box. So the first thing we're going to need is a panel container. And we can size that however we want, but the one thing we need to do here is reparent it so that it is the scene root. We don't need this. This is just an arbitrary piece of crap. And then this panel container, what we'll do is we will go over here into the layout and we will bind it to the bottom of the screen. And there we go. We have a panel container, right? Now we do have a theme open down here, but this theme is not currently attached. You can see how it's empty. This is a different theme. We could save it and then load it here. We could also create a new theme. It's not that big a deal either way. So if we were going to do that, we could introduce something cool, like just a little bit of skew or something maybe. Just click it and add in the skew. This is editing the theme. This is not a theme override. This is the theme itself. We can also do it over here. So panel container styles, style box, and then just give it a little skew. Yeah, like that. That looks okay. And we'll just bump it in a little bit so that it has a little bit of margins on the sides. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do a little trick where we tell it to expand. Now the reason we're doing this is because that will make it compatible with literally anything we could ever want to do with this. We'll show you what we mean there in a second, but essentially, now that we've got the panel container set up, we can start to add in the elements we want. Now maybe you would prefer to use a panel for this. It really does depend on what you want. In our case, we're going to go ahead and add in a VBox. And we're going to go and add in a text box. And this will be the name. So we'll go ahead and our panel container is currently a little bit flabby. It's got very big content margins because it was intended for a, I will go ahead and make the left a little bit bigger. It was intended for a menu, so the content margins are set up for that. So when we type stuff in here, my name is name, whatever, right? You can see it doesn't pop up, and that's because the VBox container is inquiring how big the various children would like to be, and the rich text label by default has no preference. But you can tell it to fit content, boom, and now it pops up. Now this text might be the right color, might be the wrong color. It really depends on what you want. Our margins are still a little bit wrong, so we'll just keep going back in there and tweaking those margins. And of course, we can also tweak the rich text. We can just go down here and override the rich text. And then we can change the color of the rich text to anything we want and the size to be whatever we want. So we'll just go down to normal font size and we'll set it up as 30. And of course, we can then add in another panel container. And then this can contain another rich text label. And this can be the text. I said, and of course it's not showing up because again, the VBox doesn't know that this should occupy space. So again, we have to click fit content. Now this text, maybe we don't want this exact setup. And of course it's not quite right. Things are floating a little funny. There's a lot of things going a little bit wrong here. The first thing we want to do is make it actually fill up the available space, which we can do by simply telling it to do exactly that. There we go. The other thing we want to do is maybe change how this looks. Now one option would be to use a new theme. This empty theme override it just accepts whatever its parent's theme was. We can simply set this to be a new theme and it will work fine. We could use a type variation. I don't recommend this. I've looked into it, and as far as I can tell, it's largely abandoned. I expect it to be radically changed in upcoming versions of Godot, so I'd avoid it for now. The third option is you can always use a theme override. Theme overrides are not generally what you should do if you are going to be doing it a lot, because you have to do it every time, and you generally don't want to do that. But for our case here, we'll just go ahead and make it a new box and set the black background color to something darker like this. And of course, we can always change all of those same values. So we can have our skew, and we can have our margin. By the way, expand margins goes just out like this. It doesn't affect the layout. It's entirely visual. Content margins are what you want. And of course, we can change the text itself if we want. We can go in here and go down into themes here and override the font sizes and make it so it's not quite so big. Whatever we want, right? So this is the sort of thing where you can go ahead and design any sort of setup you'd like and spend as much or as little time as you'd like working out how it's going to look and how it looks best. It's very easy to do. You do not have to fuss around with nesting things inside of, panels, inside of panel containers, inside of panels, inside of panel containers. That's almost never necessary. Usually it's going to be either all controls or all non-controls right up until the last second. Okay? So those are the 3 big rules on how to do UI. We want to understand that 2D nodes are blue and don't want to work with our UI. So just to show you that, if we were going to do a texture display, we have a texture rect and that sort of stuff. It's all inside of the control, but there are also 2D versions of that, sprites. So it's very easy to get confused, but these are blue. So that's an easy way to just look over here. If it's not all green, you're doing something wrong. Second thing is you want to understand that containers always control the layout of their children. And the third thing is you use themes to tell those containers how to control the layout of their children. Other than that, it's all pretty standard in terms of how it works. Most game engines work in the exact same way. So I consider this to be just fine. I have no problems working through fairly complicated UI. It's worth noting that there are a whole bunch of things you can do programmatically, and some of those are quite deft. For example, if you have 100 buttons, you can use a function bind rather than simply accepting an event. There are lots of other things you can do. If you're trying to do animations, you can just create a tween on the base tree and then tell the tween to animate a specific thing. So you could, for example, have this whole thing snap open using 3 lines of code. But I'm not going to want to teach you all of that here. Maybe I'll teach it some other time if people care. But this is a really simple way to do things. And we could have made this exact same setup using non-controls, non-containers, that is. We could have manually dragged stuff around. The reason that this is so nice, we'll go ahead and save this. There it is. The reason this is so nice is because of what we can do with it. So let's go ahead and add to this control HBox and a VBox. So we'll go ahead and here's our HBox container. We'll go ahead and make this like this, right? Congratulations, we have an HBox container with horizontal box. We can just drag these in. Interesting, I accidentally misdragged. There we are. So you can see that this automatically adjusts. No muss, no fuss. So you can nest it. Now obviously the skew is causing us some grief here in terms of we're going to be skewing off the sides of the screen, but we could always just change that. No big deal. And we can also add in, say, a VBox inside. And then we could put 2 of these inside the VBox. And oh, I did not like that. I must have typed something wrong at some point. Well, chances are high that if I just delete these, it'll work. Oh, you know what it is? The VBox container isn't set to automatically expand. There we are. So that was a problem with the VBox not having this set up. So it was trying to cram those into 1 pixel wide. Sometimes that sort of thing happens. Rather than panicking, just try and figure out which of the things is malfunctioning. It might not be the most obvious one. So hey, did you want to create a game about talking to people on your phone and you want a chat interface? Well, why not go ahead and create a scroll node, a scroll container right there. And we drop the VBox container inside of that scroll container. Scroll container, again, isn't automatically expanding, so we'll go ahead and do it like this. And if we wanted to, we could just duplicate these, and you can see that they now have a scroll. So we could, in fact, just run this, and you can see that we can scroll it. If these were buttons, we could click on them. They could be panels full of dialogue. You could manually add new dialogue elements to this control very, very easily. It's pretty trivial to do all of this stuff. So there is no problem creating UI in Godot. It is very straightforward and very easy. And if you run into an issue, it's almost certainly that you're simply using the wrong tool. And that's not to tell you that you're dumb if you can't do it. Obviously, if you can't find the right tool, that's not your fault. It's Godot's fault for naming things very silly. But there is a tool there. And if you go looking for Godot friends on On Mastodon or on Blue Sky, there are plenty of people who use Godot and can probably help you find the tool you're missing. UI is very simple. It's very easy. And if something is going wrong, find the tool that makes it not go wrong. Have fun.